So good evening and welcome to the Solstice Speaker Series hosted by SGI. My name is Teresa, and this evening is about honoring and remembering the children who never made it home and the survivors and their families of the residential school system. Tomorrow, September 30th, is Orange Shirt Day and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Let us listen with open ears and hearts to the stories this evening. Please join me in welcoming the Anaquod family, whose father is featured in the film. We Were Children. We are honored to have them attend and participate in this evening. We would also like to acknowledge other distinguished guests in the audience this evening. Chief Evan Bray of the Regina Police Service, Andrea Johnson, President of the Friends and important partners to us of the Friends of the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. Could you put your hand up, please? Thank you. There are also other Friends board members here. Could you raise your hands, please? And most importantly, please acknowledge all elders present in the audience. We are honored by your presence this evening. Welcome all of you in person, as well as those joining us through the live stream. And now please welcome our Solstice Speaker Series sponsor and host for this evening, Heather Anderson from SGI.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Heather Anderson with SGI, and I'm very pleased to be your MC for this important and impactful event that we're about to partake in together tonight. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on Treaty 4 territory, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, Ojibwe, and the home of the Métis. We acknowledge the land in an act of reconciliation and recognize those who have shared the land before us, those who continue to share the land, and those who will share the land in the future. We further acknowledge the harms and mistakes of our past, and we commit together to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I would like to thank the sous chef, Dickie Uzichapi, tonight for that wonderful meal that I know a lot of you got the opportunity to enjoy. And again, I would just like to say how honored SGI is to be a part of this event and to be a proud sponsor of the Solstice Speaker Series. It is an important part of SGI's commitment to reconciliation and to the Indigenous community here in Saskatchewan. We applaud the Friends of the Royal Saskatchewan Museum for hosting this 4-part series that gives a voice and a platform to these important stories. I have a few housekeeping items to mention before we get started with the program. So masks are required when not eating tonight. Guests, they are encouraged, as you've already been made aware of, to social distance as best as you can here in the auditorium. Sanitization stations are in the lobby. Washrooms are located just outside the theater entrance. And there are 2 emergency exits at the back of the theater here. There's one also at the front of the theater, and the gathering spot, if something were to happen, is in the parking lot. Before we move ahead with the program, I would first like to ask Gwendy and Gaylene Anaquod to say a few words. Gwendy and Gaylene are our honored guests this evening. They are the daughters of the late Glen Anaquod. Glen's story is featured as one of the 2 residential school survivors that we will be viewing tonight in the We Were Children documentary. Gwendy and Gaylene, if you could please come and say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, for that wonderful prayer, always starting us off in a good way. It's always good to acknowledge the tobacco that we were provided and to acknowledge our cultural traditional ways that have, for much of our time, have been lost. And so it's really good that we're coming back and being honored that way by this organization and being asked we're honored. As stated, my name's Gaylene Anaquod, and this is my sister Gwendy, and we're the daughters of Glen Anaquod, who's featured in the documentary. Glen was born in 1948. He was born to Vincent Anaquod and Marion Ketchamunia. He is from the Muscowpetung First Nation, and he was, at a very young age, orphaned and was taken to residential school at LeBret Indian Residential School in LeBret, Saskatchewan. We were asked, when we were approached to participate tonight, we were asked to speak about our experience with our dad when he was filming this documentary. And Gwendy and I kind of had a chuckle because for much of his filming, we didn't know that he was filming the documentary. This was something that was personal to him that he did. However, really want to commend, and I have to acknowledge Eagle Vision Production with Lisa Meaches, who shared the story of how Glen and Lyna were chosen. About 6 years before 2012, when the production was released and the TRC process was ongoing, Lisa traveled across Canada researching all of the stories to produce a documentary. And she had shared with us that of all of the stories that she had come across, they first picked over 3,000 of these stories. From 3,000, they brought those stories down again, did a review, and brought those stories down, and then they interviewed 10 of the participants. I believe it was 10. And I think from that 10, they had interviewed Dad and Lyna and others, and then made the selection, and Dad's story was chosen. His story is very poignant, I guess is the word. It's very, for some it's very emotional and shocking. And we're very fortunate to have the dad that we had. For someone who was an orphan, who went through the experiences he had, which you'll see him and you'll hear him share his story. He made a choice, and he chose love. He chose kindness and forgiveness in a way to live, and that's the legacy that we as a family, we try to move forward on. Lisa had shared many stories with us when the documentary came to fruition in 2011 about Dad's travels and his partners, his travel partners. The film was filmed in Winnipeg, and so many times throughout the course of the filming, they had traveled to Winnipeg to film, and he had one of his main travel partners was our Uncle Murray Ironchild. And they did many travels to Winnipeg to do the documentary, and Lisa and the film crew, they all became a family when they were there. My dad, because of his upbringing, adopted everybody. Everybody was his family, everybody was his relative, and he always said, be proud of who you are, be proud of where you come from, and always show kindness and forgiveness in life. We were fortunate in many years before the film and the story actually came out that he did share his story with us. So in the early 2000s, I think, or maybe late 1990s, my dad worked and did a lot of work with Regina Coppell Child and Family Services, and in those early years, this was before the TRC. In those early years, they were looking at how the children in care, some of the systemic, I guess, barriers and the trauma and the systemic, why families were the way they were. They were looking at a healing program for the families. And in that process, my dad and the knowledge keepers in each of the 11 communities of File Hills Coppell Tribal Council prepared and undertook to look at the residential school experiences. They interviewed all of the, they went to each of the First Nations and they interviewed the elders, and it was very hard. The administration realized at that time that they needed to support healing. They had to do it in a healthy way. So they developed their own story in terms of how to look at and support the knowledge keepers to be able to share the stories, because those stories were so vital as to why our communities were struggling, why our children and our families were struggling to be whole and to be healthy. And during that time, as they were sharing, it did unearth a lot of deep trauma, I guess, that for us, my dad shared. There were many, many nights at the wee hours of the morning that I would get a knock at my door, and my dad would come, and he would be very emotional, and we would sit up for hours. And he shared the stories you'll hear tonight. He talked about how it made him feel. He talked about the need to support. He talked about why he was sharing the stories and how important it was, as hard and as difficult as it was for him as an individual to share something that was so personal to him. He felt it was even more important to help our communities and our families grow and our families heal and nurture, to be able to move forward, to deal with the issues that he needed to resolve. So he did share those quite a number of years prior to the TRC, and when the TRC and this process happened, he became in contact with Lisa Meaches in Eagle Vision Production, and they went through the filming and the story of this. I feel very, very blessed and honored that he shared his story. Feel very blessed that Eagle Vision Production was the company that did it. I found when we watched the documentary, my dad died before the film was
Premiered.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like she said, my dad died probably a year before the film was premiered, and we had a family viewing. But in saying so, when he went through the Truth and Reconciliation, we were fortunate enough that he invited us to sit with us as he sat with the lawyers and told his stories for his claim. So when we saw the documentary, it wasn't such a shock because we had heard all these stories and he had shared them with us throughout the years. And every time that he went and filmed for these documentaries, it makes sense now because he would come back and he would share with us, but we at the time didn't know he was doing all of this until he got sick. I feel very fortunate that my dad also found our culture during this time. So we always grew up with our culture, knowing our spirituality. My dad was big on that. As you know, there was a time when we weren't allowed to practice our culture or have anything to do with it. So that's one thing I'm fortunate enough. I always grew up thinking that everybody knew our culture and all First Nations people were spiritual, went to ceremonies, went to powwows. And as I grew up, I found out that was not the case. So I feel very fortunate that my dad was able to keep those teachings and those learnings and instill them into us and his grandchildren. It was knowing and listening to my dad say those stories and knowing that other children had went through this, the things that have happened to our people. My dad was a strong man. He was a very strong man. He was a loving man. He was humble. And like my sister said, that's what he instilled in us and his grandchildren, and that is his legacy.
And I think I think what we want from you, I guess, and from people that view the film is take to heart the lesson. Everything my dad did in life, he believed there was a lesson. And take that lesson as the personal lesson that it means to you as an individual, and how you can do better as a person, how you can be more aware, how you can be more empathetic. In a world that can sometimes be harsh and cruel, we each have a choice. And that was something that my dad always told us growing up. Gwendy's 10 years younger than us, and so for us older kids, we saw a different side of our dad. We did experience some of the teachings, I guess, and the habits that he had learned in residential school. Gwendy and my younger brother got to see a different side. But during that time, he shared with us, and he always, as a parent, he said, you have an opportunity to grow. I was the best parent and the best person that I could be at that time. He said, given what I knew, what I lived, and what I experienced. But I had a choice on how to come out of that. And that's the legacy that he wanted us to have, is to always look at life and what you're experiencing, good or bad, and give thanks to that experience as a learning opportunity to grow as an individual, to be, a kind person. And that is one of the legacies that when you see him in the documentary, that is the person that my dad evolved to be, despite what his experience it was. He didn't let it harden his heart. And that is something that we are always find is the gift to us, is that gift that he shared with us, and the gift of showing us how to be kind, how to forgive, how to come out of trauma, how to come out of issues, how to look at it, using our tools as First Nation people on our traditions and our culture and our language, and being proud of who we are as First Nation people.
Thank you so much, Gwendy and Gaylene. You spoke about the gift that your father gave you. With you being here tonight, you're giving us all the same gift in educating us and helping share his story. And thank you for bravely getting up here and doing that. It's really, really special to hear from you both, and it will give us such a good perspective as we view this film. Our next speaker tonight is Tim Poitras, as you've already heard. We were lucky enough to have a prayer for him earlier this evening. He's a life speaker, a residential school survivor, and a knowledge keeper from the Muscowpetung First Nation. His journey through life after residential school has led him to a place of educating youth and communities through ceremony. Over the last few years, Tim has been an advocate of Indigenous culture and education, tirelessly working to better the lives of youth and community members across Turtle Island. And I have to say, I only met Tim for a few brief moments, but he made me laugh more than once, so he's definitely got a good sense of humor. Tim will now share a few words with us. Tim?
Thank you, Heather. Amitakiapi. I just wanted to start out by acknowledging Lillian, both Gwendy and her sister's mother. Late Glen Anaquod was kind of instrumental back in about 83 for me to go to treatment in 84. My baby's 38 years old, the oldest one's 42. They've never seen me other than normal. I just wanted to start out by saying that there's a couple of men I wanted to acknowledge, not only Glen Anaquod, but the late Colin Rope. I worked with the Capel Child Family Services. I started out as their board co-chair. In the days of Harper, when he apologized to Indigenous nations for this colonization policy, residential school policy, my late uncle, well, he's not late, sorry, I better get this straight. My uncle Brian McNabb said he could take that $350 million and put it in Gordon's, that's my mother's First Nation, and not live to see the benefit of healing. So there's long-term psychological impacts that many of us have to struggle with. We've got over 6,500 graves that you're finding across the country. We can't hide the past anymore. They tried to bury it, but it's coming to light. So as I started my prayer out, I said 48% of the children that went to these institutions did not live to see the benefit of education. And then late Colin Rope, as we sat as a team, we crafted our mission statement was to allow over a time our First Nations people to come to realize what was taken from them through relevant curriculum development. And it was in line with child welfare. So Glen also was our elder, and I sat on the committee, and I was also the coordinator. So we had elders forums that was always checking our information before we went down the line to explain it to survivors at large. So we interviewed 300 residential school survivors from 7 different First Nations. And as we'd lose elders and we'd lose survivors, we'd incorporate out of the 240, we worked on a continuum. So having said that, we tied in both qualitative and quantitative data on the true impacts of colonization. Our document on captivity was over 600 pages, and I was scared to give that out to our own people because we have impoverished racism. We don't come from privilege. For the Caucasian people, they're the ones that show us racism. Racism did not exist in us in the prairies. We got along with nation to nation. We learned racism in residential school. I remember, for many of you remember your first day in residential or in school, you have fond memories. Mine was a nightmare. I knew I was going someplace, but I didn't know where I was going. I had to pack my bags. I didn't even get to wear my home clothes. They kept them, and they gave me boarding school clothes that were all numbered. My very first year, I went to residential school. I don't know why, but it was a little boy. I was the 21st student registered that year. We had 100 junior boys. So for our younger people, it's hard for you to really, truly understand the negative conditioning we received in these institutions. For many of us that went out to try and start families, we did very poor. My mom and dad break up when I was 18 months old because they both went to residential school. I'm the 4th generation residential school survivor. My great-grandparents, there was an arranged marriage by the priest that he picked his wife. My grandparents both went to residential school. My grandmother was an astounded Catholic where we all had to be baptized and we all had to have Catholic names. So that caused huge negative impacts in our nations. As I was overseeing the residential school research in the Muscowpetung Nation. Out of one of the families, you had the Protestant, you had the Anglican, you had the Catholic diocese lined up, taking the children as they become of age out of these institutions, because you don't realize that the children were to be separated from age 6, and it could have been up to 21. So what the parents had to sign was an admittance to application, and what that was, a legal document surrendering or relinquishing their rights as parents over to these churches. So if it was good enough for my great-grandparents and my grandparents and my parents, then it was certainly good enough for me. So we have to realize that just in my family alone, for me, 5 generations ago, our people were living in the prairies in their natural state, because the prairies wasn't really developed yet. They called it Rupert's Land. So if many of our therapists, many of our people trying to help our residential school survivors and the intergenerational survivors, they have a hard time trying to connect with our membership, because many of them don't know what a residential school is. Usually they're Caucasian, and many of our own people, because of education, there's a term they called introverted racism. Just because they have a degree and it gives them qualifications to do certain things, they look down at our own people and they make fun of their own people because of the education they have, so they're not using it in the right way. So lots of times our therapists aren't really connecting with survivors and intergenerational survivors. So the aftermath is huge. It's far-reaching. I'm talking more of a clinical lens, because I know in the audience there are people with the therapist background. We need to open our lens so we can be more empathetic, more caring, more understanding. So having said that, I don't want to take too much time. I just wanted to make some crucial points. I want to thank the Anaquod family, because late Glen and both his daughters, everybody in the family sees this colonization, this residential school differently. So having said that, I want to thank Teresa and all the staff here, the volunteers, our sponsors, for contributing, making this possible. Mitakasan.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that. We certainly appreciate your words and your presence here this evening. Please note, we do have wellness warriors with us tonight, Connie Starblanket and Cian Dusik. If you could just raise your hands, it might be a bit tough to see. But Connie and Cian are student counselors, and they are here tonight for anyone who may need emotional support. What we're about to see is emotional, and it's all right if you get worked up. Take a moment, go outside, and we have those supports on hand available. If you require any assistance, you can just head to the lobby and we will connect you with one of those counselors. We'd now like to take a short break. We're going to take about 10 minutes. You can go ahead and take a bathroom break and then get settled in, and when we return, we'll view the film We Were Children.
And at least I got to talk about it. Took a long time, but finally able to speak.
All right. That wraps up the film, We Were Children, and while of course it is difficult to watch, by watching this film we're learning and we're healing together and we're working towards reconciliation, which is what we've all gathered here tonight to do. If you or someone you know is triggered while learning about residential schools, please, we encourage you to contact the crisis line, or if you're a Government of Saskatchewan employee, you can call the LifeWorks line by Morneau Chappelle Care Access Center, and that is a toll-free number. Before we wrap up the program, I want to introduce you to a very special performer tonight. We're going to have Meadow Muscowpetung join us, and she's going to speak a little bit about the Jingle Dress Dance and also perform 2 dances for us. Now, Meadow Muscowpetung, whose spiritual Indian name is Wapa Nituk, is a grade 12 student who attends Allen Blakeney Adult Campus. She's lived in Winnipeg and Regina and the Standing Buffalo First Nation. She's the youngest of 9 children. Her parents are Tiffany Keewatin and Joseph Musqua, and her grandparents are Bernice Uzichapi and Cynthia Sangway.
Meadow has been dancing powwow since she was 9 years old and was recently selected as the 2021 Senior Princess for her First Nation, which is the Pepecasis First Nation. She currently volunteers with the Indigenous Christian Fellowship, and Meadow is proud to be selected as a role model and proud to share her First Nations roots with you tonight, whether it's through dance or her own very personal story. So please join me in welcoming Meadow Musqua to the stage.
Thank you. I just want to first start off saying that it's an honor to be here and to be gifted tobacco to, share my story through jingle dress dancing and, just be who I am. Every child matters. We've heard this a lot, but what does it mean? I'll tell you what it means to me. It means that after many years of hardship for my people, there is a growing awareness about what happened in residential schools. Every Child Matters has opened the door so that the public knows that we as Indigenous people are still affected by residential schools today. These schools did not just impact the kids that attended, but in generations afterwards as well. We lost many of our children to these institutes, many who never came back home. Our relatives, aunties, uncles, cookums and mushrooms, who are finally free but still have not healed. I am here today because my grandma's grandfather and dad have all survived these schools. I am Meadow Musqua. I was born in the afternoon of February 23rd, 2004, to the proud parents of Joseph Musqua and Tiffany Keeper in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I have 5 older brothers and 3 older sisters, making me the youngest of 9 children. In grade 2, I remember vividly learning about Indians, and I was the only Indigenous kid in the class at the time. I didn't know I was Native until the teacher called upon me telling me I was an Indian. I went home that day crying my eyes out to my father and mother. It's not that I didn't know anything about being Native, as was already introduced to pipe ceremonies, sun dancing, etc. I already knew I was different from everyone else. I just didn't know that I was Indigenous. When I was 8, my family separated, and my 2 brothers and I moved to Standing Buffalo First Nations, where we lived with my grandma. During this time, I learned a lot about my own culture, including my first sweat. My grandma made me stay inside the lodge all 4 rounds, telling me, once you start something, you must finish. When I was 9 years old, I started dancing traditional. I thought it was too slow for my liking, and I fell in love with the jingle dress dancers. I loved how they moved and just knew that's what I wanted to be. My grandma then started making my jingle dress for me and taught me how to dance with old VHS videos. I can still hear her words, always stay on your toes, keep your head up, and be proud and confident about each step you take. I then earned my Indian name my grandfathers had given me. I am Wapanetak, meaning morning star in English. I rise with the sun and shine in the dark. When I was in grade 6, my siblings began to move away from the reserve and came to the city, Regina. I missed them tremendously. About a year after, I too moved away and lived with my mother. I went to high school here in Regina, and the impact of racism affected me. I never got the same opportunities as the other Caucasian kids who attended. There was an incident that happened whereby a faculty member had called a friend of mine a dirty Indian. I didn't feel safe and had a hard time wanting to be at school, as I already knew I couldn't be myself as an Indigenous kid. As a result, I started to skip classes. I was viewed different by others, and I recall getting weird looks for wearing traditional skirts and traditional clothing. My mother and I decided that it was best for me to transfer schools, and I'm glad that I did, as I found safety at a different school, and I no longer worried about how others would react about my culture. In grade 9, I began to volunteer at the Indigenous Christian Fellowship. It helped me a lot about bringing me confidence on being a baptized Mormon and growing up Indigenous. Seeing how both are very much alike, they both believe that there is someone in a higher power watching over us, either through prayer or smudging. angels, or the grandfathers and grandmothers watching over us, protecting us from above. I gained a lot of confidence to dance more, and I'm very proud to say that I am both. I became a voice for my people on Canada Day. I spoke my truth and even danced with a little girl who'd ever danced jingle dress before. She was very nervous, and I told her that it will be okay because she was learning about herself and culture. Thinking that the kids who went to residential schools never got the chance, and here she was reaching for the opportunity. I believe that she was a lost soul of a child from residential schools who never got the chance to learn about her culture. And now she can learn as a free Indigenous child reborn. I never did see her again. This summer I was interviewed by Global News about my own family trauma that had been passed down from my family. On my dad's side, they don't really know how to show their love and affection as a result for how they were treated when they were children. My mother had lost her own family traditions, and the reality is that my grandma is still trying to grasp her own culture while still trying to teach me the little bit that remains. Each day, I thank their creator for keeping them safe. I am very blessed to have people to call my family because we are stronger together. I'm not done. Sorry, I just got a little emotional. Anyways, I'll keep going. This summer I was crowned Senior Princess of my reserve Papikassis First Nations. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I'm very proud to say that I'm very honored to have been selected and represent my nation in a good and humble way. I'll continue to be a role model and show the younger generations that it's okay to be who you are. I am a Panatak, Mero Musqua, and I'm honored to share this dance with you as a young, proud Indigenous woman.
Amazing. One more big round of applause for Meadow Musqua. I also encourage you to Google her because she's been in the news for a very good reason the last few days as well. She is an incredible dancer, and thank you so much, Meadow, for sharing your talent with us this evening. It's a true honor. That is a wrap of tonight's program. We want to thank everyone for coming out and supporting the Solstice Speakers Series hosted by SGI. Now, you may have heard me mention earlier on in the program that this is one of 4 events that will be taking place over the course of the next year. So make sure you mark your calendars and look out for those. There'll be one in December and then in the spring as well. We hope everyone tonight will be inspired by what they've seen here and work towards meaningful efforts towards reconciliation. As you all know, tomorrow is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and we all have a part to play in reflecting and learning from the past. So please take a moment to honor survivors of residential schools and their loved ones by learning the truth about Canada's history and encouraging others to do so as well. On behalf of everyone at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, the Friends of the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, and SGI, thank you so much for joining this event tonight. We're so pleased that you could be in attendance, and thank you for all of those watching the live stream as well. Take care.